The dim glow of the starship's interior lights cast long shadows across the metallic walls, illuminating the figure of Commander Kaeldar as he stood at the viewport. His four-clawed hands clasped tightly behind his back. His scaled skin, a deep shade of emerald, shimmered faintly under the artificial light, and his slit-pupilled eyes reflected the swirling nebula outside. Kaeldar was a veteran of the Zarathian Dominion, a warrior whose name was whispered with reverence and fear across the galaxy. He had led fleets, crushed rebellions, and conquered worlds. Yet, as he gazed at the blue-green orb of Earth below, he felt an unfamiliar unease settle in his chest. Behind him, the soft hum of the ship's engines was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. Kaeldar turned to see Lieutenant Vera, his second-in-command, approaching. Her silver exoskeleton gleamed as she moved, her insectoid features betraying no emotion. "Commander," she said, her voice a low, resonant buzz. "The human delegation has arrived. They await your presence in the docking bay." Kaeldar nodded, his tail flicking slightly in anticipation. "Very well. Let us see what these humans have to offer." His tone was dismissive, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed his curiosity. The Zarathian Dominion had encountered countless species in their expansion, but humanity was an enigma. They were neither the most advanced nor the most physically imposing, yet they had managed to survive in a galaxy that favored the ruthless. Kaeldar intended to uncover their secrets, or crush them if they proved unworthy. The docking bay was a cavernous space, filled with the faint scent of ozone and the distant hum of machinery. Kaeldar and Vera entered to find a small group of humans waiting, their expressions a mix of curiosity and caution. At the forefront stood Captain Elena Marquez, a tall woman with sharp features and piercing gray eyes. Her uniform was crisp, her posture confident, but Kaeldar noted the slight tension in her jaw. She was wary as she should be. "Commander Kaeldar," Elena said, her voice steady despite the weight of his gaze. "On behalf of Earth's United Coalition, I welcome you to our world. We are honored by your visit." Kaeldar tilted his head, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Honored?" he repeated, his voice a low rumble. "Or fearful? Do not mistake my presence for a gesture of goodwill, Captain. The Zarathian Dominion does not extend invitations lightly." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "We are well aware of your reputation, Commander, but we believe there is much we can learn from one another. Our histories, our struggles, they may hold value even to a species as advanced as yours." Kaeldar's lips curled into something resembling a smile, though it lacked warmth. Bold words, for a species that has barely ventured beyond its own star system. "Very well, Captain. Entertain me. Share your stories, and I will decide if they are worth my time." The group moved to a nearby conference room, its walls adorned with holographic displays of Earth's history. As they settled into their seats, Elena began to speak, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. She started with the great wars of the 20th century, describing the trenches of World War I, the deafening roar of artillery, and the relentless advance of soldiers through mud and blood. Kaeldar listened intently, his initial skepticism giving way to a grudging respect. He had seen war, had waged it on a scale most species could scarcely imagine, but there was something about the human capacity for endurance that struck a chord within him. Next, Elena spoke of World War II, her words painting vivid images of cities reduced to ash, of entire nations brought to their knees, and of the indomitable spirit that had driven humanity to rebuild. She spoke of the Holocaust, her voice trembling with emotion, and of the atomic bombs that had ended the war but left scars that would never fully heal. Kaeldar's tail twitched, his claws digging into the armrests of his chair. He had expected tales of glory and conquest, not this raw, unflinching honesty. As the hours passed, Elena continued, recounting the Cold War, the Vietnam War, and the War on Terror. Each story was more harrowing than the last, yet through it all, one theme remained constant: humanity's ability to endure, to adapt, and to find hope even in the darkest of times. Kaeldar found himself captivated, his earlier arrogance replaced by a growing sense of unease. These humans were not weak. They were resilient in ways he had never considered. By the time Elena finished, the room was silent save for the faint hum of the ship's systems. Kaeldar leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had come to Earth expecting to find a species ripe for conquest, but instead, he had been confronted with a mirror, one that reflected not only humanity's flaws but also their strength. He glanced at Vera, who gave a slight nod, her expression unreadable but her posture tense. "Captain Marquez," Kaeldar said at last, his voice softer than before. "You have given me much to consider. Your stories are unexpected. I will need time to reflect on what I have heard." Elena nodded, her expression one of cautious relief. "We understand, Commander. We are here to answer any questions you may have." Kaeldar rose from his seat, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the room. "For now, I require solitude. Vera, escort our guests to their quarters. Ensure they are treated with the respect they have earned." As the humans filed out of the room, Kaeldar returned to the viewport, his gaze once again fixed on Earth. The planet seemed smaller now, yet somehow more significant. He had come seeking conquest, but what he had found was something far more profound. The question was, what would he do with this knowledge? The answer, he knew, would shape not only his own destiny but that of the entire galaxy. The section ends with Kaeldar standing alone, his thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and revelation. As the stars outside the viewport burned brightly, a silent reminder of the vastness of the universe and the choices that lay ahead. The stage is set for the next chapter, where the aliens' internal conflict will come to a head, and the fate of two species will hang in the balance. The corridors of the Zorathian starship were eerily silent as Captain Elena Marquez followed Lieutenant Vera to the quarters assigned to the human delegation. The walls, smooth and metallic, seemed to absorb sound, creating an atmosphere of oppressive stillness. Elena's footsteps echoed faintly, a reminder of how out of place she and her team were in this alien environment. She glanced at her companions, Dr. Raj Patel, a historian with a knack for diplomacy, and Lieutenant Commander Alex Carter, a military strategist whose sharp eyes missed nothing. Both wore expressions of guarded curiosity, their faces illuminated by the soft, bluish light that permeated the ship. Vera stopped before a door that slid open with a faint hiss. "These are your quarters," she said, her voice a low, resonant buzz. "You will find everything you require. If you need assistance, use the communication panel." She turned to leave, but Elena stepped forward, her voice cutting through the silence. "Lieutenant Vera," she said, her tone respectful but firm, "may I ask what Commander Kaeldar intends to do next? Our mission here is one of cooperation," but his demeanor suggests skepticism. Vera paused, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the light as she regarded Elena. "The commander is not accustomed to being challenged," she said after a moment. "Your stories have unsettled him. This is rare. What he decides to do next will depend on whether he sees value in your species or merely a threat to be neutralized." Elena's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression neutral. "We appreciate his consideration. Please convey our willingness to answer any further questions he may have." Vera inclined her head slightly, a gesture that might have been respect or mere acknowledgement, before turning and disappearing down the corridor. The door to the quarters slid shut behind the humans, leaving them alone in the spacious room. The walls were bare, the furniture minimalistic and alien in design, but the atmosphere was undeniably comfortable. "Well," Raj said, breaking the silence, "that went better than I expected. He didn't immediately declare war on us, so that's a win." Alex snorted, crossing his arms as he leaned against the wall. "Don't get too comfortable. Kaeldar's not the type to be swayed by a few stories. He's a conqueror through and through. If he doesn't see us as useful, he'll see us as a problem." Elena sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I know, but we've planted a seed. Whether it grows or withers depends on what we do next." She moved to the small table in the center of the room, where a holographic display projected a map of the ship. "We need to be ready for anything. Alex, I want you to analyze their technology. Look for weaknesses, but don't make it obvious." Raj, keep digging into their history. If we can find common ground, we might be able to turn this around. As her team set to work, Elena found herself drawn to the small viewport in the room. Earth hung in the distance, a fragile blue gem against the vast darkness of space. She thought of the stories she had shared with Kaeldar, the wars, the suffering, the resilience. They were not tales of glory, but they were honest. And honesty, she hoped, might be the key to bridging the gap between their species. Meanwhile, in the depths of the ship, Kaeldar stood in his private chamber, his mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. The stories Elena had told lingered in his mind, vivid and unrelenting. He had expected tales of conquest, of battles won through strength and strategy. Instead, he had been confronted with the raw, unvarnished truth of humanity's struggles. The trenches of World War I, the devastation of World War II, the moral quagmire of the Cold War. Each story had chipped away at his certainty. He turned to the holographic display in his chamber, which showed a map of the galaxy. The Zorathian Dominion's territories stretched across countless star systems, a testament to their power. Yet, for all their conquests, Kaeldar could not shake the feeling that something was missing. The humans, with their fractured history and unyielding spirit, had something his people lacked. But what was it? A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he growled, his voice echoing in the chamber. The door slid open to reveal Vera. "Commander," she said, her tone respectful but urgent. "We have intercepted a transmission from the human vessel. It appears they are attempting to establish contact with their homeworld." Kaeldar's eyes narrowed. "What is the content of the transmission?" "They are reporting on their meeting with you," Vera replied. "They speak of your interest in their history. They believe there is potential for an alliance." Kaeldar's tail flicked in irritation. "An alliance? They presume much." He paced the room, his claws clicking against the floor. "And yet, their resilience is undeniable. If they can endure such horrors and still strive for peace, perhaps they are not as weak as I believed." Vera tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "What is your command, Commander?" Kaeldar stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on the holographic map. "Summon Captain Marquez. I wish to speak with her again. Alone." As Vera left to carry out his orders, Kaeldar returned to the viewport, his thoughts a whirlwind of doubt and determination. The humans had challenged his worldview, and he could not ignore the implications. But was their resilience a strength to be admired, or a threat to be eliminated? The answer, he knew, would shape the future of both their species. Elena arrived at Kaeldar's chamber shortly after, her expression calm but her heart racing. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. Kaeldar stood at the viewport, his silhouette imposing against the backdrop of stars. "Captain Marquez," he said without turning, his voice low and measured. "You have given me much to consider. Your stories are troubling. They speak of a species that has endured unimaginable suffering, yet continues to fight for survival. Tell me, why should I see this as anything other than weakness?" Elena took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "Because, Commander, it is not the absence of suffering that defines strength, but the ability to endure it. We have made mistakes, yes. We have caused great harm both to ourselves and to others. But we have also learned from those mistakes. We strive to be better, not just for ourselves, but for the galaxy as a whole." For a long moment, Kaeldar said nothing. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Finally, he nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "Very well, Captain. I will consider your words. But know this, if you betray my trust, there will be no mercy." As she left the chamber, Elena felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for the first time, she believed that peace might be possible. Kaeldar's skepticism remained, but it was tempered by something new, curiosity, perhaps, or even respect. And in that small shift, she saw the potential for a future where humanity and the Zorathian Dominion could stand as equals, rather than adversaries. The section ends with Elena returning to her quarters, her mind racing with possibilities, while Kaeldar remains at the viewport, his thoughts a storm of doubt and determination. The stage is set for the next chapter, where the fragile trust between the two species will be tested, and the fate of the galaxy will hang in the balance. The Zorathian starship's command center was a hive of activity, its crew moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Commander Kael'thar stood at the center of it all, his emerald scales glinting under the harsh artificial light. His four-clawed hands moved deftly across the holographic interface, issuing orders with a calm authority that belied the storm raging within him. The stories Captain Elena Marquez had shared still echoed in his mind, each one a fragment of a puzzle he could not quite solve. Humanity's resilience was undeniable, but their capacity for destruction was equally evident. He needed clarity, and there was only one way to obtain it. "Vera," he barked, his voice cutting through the hum of the command center. "Prepare the shuttle. I will visit their world." Vera's multifaceted eyes flickered with surprise, but she nodded without hesitation. "As you command, Commander. Shall I assemble an escort?" Kael'thar hesitated, his tail flicking in agitation. "No, this is a matter I must handle alone. Inform Captain Marquez that I will accompany her to Earth. She will act as my guide." As Vera relayed the orders, Kael'thar turned his gaze to the viewport. Earth loomed large, its blue and green surface a stark contrast to the barren worlds he had conquered. He had seen countless planets, each one a stepping stone in the Zorathian Dominion's relentless expansion. But this one was different. It was not the resources or the strategic value that drew him, it was the people. He needed to understand them, to see for himself the world that had shaped such a paradoxical species. Elena was waiting in the docking bay when Kael'thar arrived, her expression a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "Commander," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "I understand you wish to visit Earth. May I ask why?" Kael'thar's slit-pupiled eyes bore into hers, his gaze unyielding. "Your stories have raised questions, Captain. I seek answers. You will show me your world, not as a diplomat, but as a warrior. I would see the places where your kind has fought, suffered, and endured." Elena nodded, her mind racing. This was an opportunity, but it was also a risk. Kael'thar's presence on Earth could either bridge the gap between their species or widen it irreparably. "Very well," she said. "I'll take you to the places that shaped our history. But I must warn you, what you see may not be easy to understand." The shuttle ride to Earth was tense, the silence between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. Kael'thar sat rigidly in his seat, his claws resting on the armrests as he stared out the viewport. The descent through the atmosphere was smooth, the shuttle's advanced technology rendering the journey almost effortless. As they touched down in a secluded area near the ruins of an ancient battlefield, Kael'thar stepped out, his senses immediately assaulted by the unfamiliar sights, sounds, and smells of Earth. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation, the ground beneath his feet soft and yielding. The ruins of a once great fortress loomed in the distance, its crumbling walls a testament to the passage of time. Elena led the way, her footsteps silent as she navigated the overgrown path. "This is Verdun," she said, her voice low, "one of the bloodiest battlefields of World War I. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers died here, fighting for a few miles of land." Kael'thar's eyes swept over the landscape, taking in the scars left by artillery shells and the remnants of trenches that had once been filled with mud and blood. "Why?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Why fight for such a small piece of land? What was the purpose?" Elena paused, her gaze distant. It wasn't about the land, not really. It was about pride, about fear, about the belief that one side's way of life was worth defending at any cost. In the end, it was a senseless waste of life. But it also taught us the cost of war, the importance of finding other ways to resolve our conflicts. Kael'thar said nothing, his expression unreadable as he continued to survey the ruins. The weight of history pressed down on him, a tangible force that seemed to seep into his very bones. He had seen countless battlefields, but none had felt like this. There was a rawness to this place, a sense of loss that transcended time. The next stop was Hiroshima. The city had been rebuilt, its streets bustling with life, but the memory of the atomic bomb still lingered. Elena led Kaildar to the Peace Memorial Park, where the skeletal remains of the Genbaku Dome stood as a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for destruction. "This is where the first atomic bomb was dropped," she said, her voice heavy with emotion. In an instant, tens of thousands of lives were lost. The survivors suffered for years, their bodies and minds scarred by radiation. Kaildar stared at the dome, his mind struggling to comprehend the scale of the devastation. "Why?" he asked again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why unleash such destruction on your own kind?" Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she held his gaze. "Because we were afraid. Afraid of losing. Afraid of what the other side might do. It was a terrible mistake, one that we have spent decades trying to atone for. But it also showed us the consequences of our actions, the importance of restraint." Kaildar turned away, his tail flicking in agitation. The contradictions of humanity were maddening. They were capable of such cruelty, yet they sought redemption. They waged war, yet they longed for peace. He could not reconcile these opposing forces, and it frustrated him. The final stop was a small village in Rwanda, where the scars of genocide were still visible. Elena led Kaildar to a memorial, its walls inscribed with the names of the dead. "This is where humanity's darkest impulses were laid bare," she said, her voice trembling. "Neighbors turned on neighbors, friends betrayed friends. It was a massacre born of hatred and fear." Kaildar's claws clenched into fists, his scales bristling with anger. "And yet you survived," he said, his voice a low growl. "You endured as you always do, but at what cost? How many more must die before you learn?" Elena's shoulders slumped, the weight of his words pressing down on her. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we keep trying. That's all we can do." Kaildar turned to face her, his eyes blazing with intensity. "You are a puzzle, Captain Marquez, a species of contradictions. I do not know whether to admire you or fear you." Kaildar said nothing, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and revelation. He had come to Earth seeking answers, but all he had found were more questions. The humans were not weak, nor were they invincible. They were flawed, yes, but they were also resilient. And in that resilience, he saw a glimmer of hope, not just for humanity, but for the galaxy as a whole. As they returned to the shuttle, Kaildar's thoughts were a storm of conflicting emotions. He had seen the best and worst of humanity, and it had shaken him to his core. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: the fate of their species was intertwined. Whether that would lead to peace or destruction remained to be seen. The section ends with Kaildar and Elena boarding the shuttle, the weight of their journey heavy on their shoulders. The stage is set for the next chapter, where the fragile understanding between them will be tested, and the choices they make will shape the future of both their species.